In this chapter, we're going to take a look at using the theme settings system in Drupal in order to make certain aspects of our theme configurable. This is really awesome when you've got a theme that may be used on more than one site, and you want certain parts of it to be configurable by the administrator. For our site, what we're going to do is we're going to make it so that this little character here, the delimiter in between items in our breadcrumb trail, is configurable. So there's going to be a form where you can set this to some other character. We're also going to make it so that this slogan up here can use some code that we've written to query Twitter and get a list of tweets from the Twitter site containing a search term and display those as the slogan on our site. But we want to make sure that you can change that slogan depending on what site you're using this theme on. So we'll take a look at how we can do that. What we're going to do is add some additional form elements to the settings form for our 960 robots theme. If I go to the Appearance tab, I get the option to click Settings for our 960 robots theme. And I get this big list of settings for the theme. I can toggle on and off different features that are enabled by the theme, upload a logo, toggle that on and off, and set a default shortcut icon. So these are all theme settings that are provided by Drupal by default for every theme. We're going to add some additional theme settings here, one so that we can set the delimiter for the breadcrumb trail, and then another so that we can enable this Twitter search functionality for our slogan. In order to do this, we need to know where this form's coming from. In Drupal, this form is generated by the function system_theme_settings. If we take a look at the code for that function, one of the things that we'll see, down towards the bottom, is that when it's displaying the system theme settings form, it's also checking to see if the enabled theme has a file named theme-settings.php in its root directory. And if it does, it goes ahead and includes that file. Inside of that file, we're going to implement hook form alter and add some additional fields to this form. The reason that this lives inside of the theme-settings.php file and not in our template.php file, like our other implementations of hook form alter, is this hook form alter may need to be used in contexts like this, where it's loaded inside of the overlay and using the 7 theme. In this case, our 960 robots template.php file isn't even being loaded. So we need to make sure that it's available in all scenarios. So the first thing we'll need to do is just add a new file inside of our 960 robots directory with the name of theme-settings.php. So I'll go ahead and create that new file. I'll save my new file inside of our sites, all themes directory inside of 960 robots, and I'm going to give it a name of theme-settings.php and then save it. And this is, of course, a PHP file, so I need to include the opening PHP tag here. Now, inside of this, I'll go ahead and implement hook form alter. For this particular use case, I'm actually going to implement the hook form ID alter version of this function because I know I'm targeting a specific form, the system_theme_settings form. So anytime you're implementing theme settings inside of your own theme, it'll always be the same as this. Just replace 960 robots with the name of your theme. Now inside of this hook form alter, I can go ahead and modify this form array and add elements to the form. In order to know what kind of elements I can add to the form, let's take a look at api.drupal.org, where we can browse the Forms API reference guide and see all of the available elements. In this case, I want to add a couple of different element types. I want to add a text field that will let me enter in a character to use for the breadcrumb delimiter. I also want another text field that will let me enter in some search terms for Twitter. And finally, I'm also going to want a checkbox that will allow an administrator to turn this Twitter search feature on and off. So let's look at implementing the text field first. If I look at all the different element types here across the top, one of them is text field. I can click on the text field label here, and it gives me some documentation about how to create a new text field element inside of a form array. So I'm going to go ahead and do that inside of our theme-settings.php file. I'm going to add a new element to the form array named breadcrumb delimiter. And my new element is an array which contains all of the properties that define how this element should be rendered to HTML. I'm going to say that this is of the type text field. I'm going to give it a title. We're also going to use the size property just to make the form element slightly smaller. I also want one of these form elements for my Twitter search terms, so I'll just go ahead and copy this, paste it, and just change the name here from breadcrumb delimiter to Twitter search term, and change our title. And we'll let this form element be a full-size text field. Finally, I'm also going to want to create a checkbox field. I'll go ahead and add that here. Let's call this one Use Twitter. And it's of the type of checkbox. It has a title. All right. So I've now added 3 elements to this form. I don't actually need to return anything from this function because this form array here is being passed by reference. That's that ampersand. So all I need to do is just add my elements to the form. If I go back to our site and refresh this page, I should see our additional elements showing up at the bottom of the form. There we go. The breadcrumb delimiter, the use Twitter for site slogan checkbox, and some Twitter search terms. I can go ahead and add things to this form. I can add a breadcrumb delimiter. For now, I'm going to make it a space, and then the slash character, and then another space. So I got our breadcrumb delimiter, and I save. The configuration options have been saved. You'll notice, however, that our value doesn't actually show up in the text field here. That's because we need to add one more thing inside of our theme-settings.php file. What we need to do is use a special API function provided by Drupal in order to access these values. That function is theme_get_setting. The theme_get_setting function takes 2 arguments. The first one is required, setting name. This is the name of the setting or variable that you'd like to get the value for. So this is going to map to our names for our form elements, like use_Twitter, for example, or breadcrumb_delimiter. What I can do then is use this function, theme_get_setting, and the name of the setting that I would like to get the value of to retrieve that value. And what it does is it goes through a process of looking up that value in a number of different locations. If I have filled out the theme setting form and saved it, it'll use whatever value is saved in the database. If there's nothing saved in the database, it'll use the default settings provided by my theme. So let's take a look at how we can both use theme_get_setting to retrieve values and how we can provide default values for those settings inside of our theme. Back in my theme-settings.php file, I'm going to use this new function to get the value of each of these settings and assign it as the default value for each of the form elements. So the name of the setting that I'm retrieving is the same as this name or key here of the element that I'm adding to the form array. So I'm going to get that one. And then we'll just do the same for each of our other elements. And then I can save that. Now, when I go to view this form, it'll use the theme_get_setting function to see if this breadcrumb delimiter setting has a value, and if it does, it'll set that value as the default value for this text field. The breadcrumb delimiter does have a setting because we just set that. Use Twitter and Twitter search term, however, don't have settings. We didn't save any values for those. But what we can do is use our .info file to provide default settings to use in this form. So inside of my themes.info file, in addition to declaring things like the regions that are available and the name of the theme and so forth, one of the things that I can do is declare default values for settings. The syntax for adding default values for these settings is like this. Settings, and then inside of square brackets, the name of that particular setting equals, and then the value that you would like to set as the default. So I can go ahead and set default settings for each of our theme settings. So now I've got default values for each of these settings inside of my .info file. I also use the theme_get_setting function to retrieve the value that's saved for any of these settings. When I go back to our site, I need to clear the cache so that it reads the themes.info file and picks up those new settings variables. So I can go ahead and do that. And then if I go back to the settings page for the 960 robots theme, we can see the values are set for each of these different fields. So the breadcrumb delimiter, which we had manually entered that text for, and then these two, use Twitter for site slogan, and then the search term. And you can see we can change this to something like robots instead, and save, and it'll save the value that we've added to the form and use that going forward instead of what we set as the default in our .info file. Now that we've been able to save these settings, let's make use of them in our theme. The key to doing that is once again the theme_get_setting function. The first thing we can do is inside of our template.php file, we can make use of the theme_get_setting function to get the delimiter for our breadcrumb trail. So I'll do that. I'll create a new variable that has the value returned from theme_get_setting, so the setting of this breadcrumb delimiter here. And then instead of using this hard-coded delimiter, I'll go ahead and use our new one. So right there, replace it in 2 places, and save. Back on our site, I should now be able to close the overlay and refresh this page. And you can see that the breadcrumb trail is now using the delimiter that we set in our theme settings form. The other thing we wanted to do was use that Twitter search term in order to query Twitter and replace the slogan of our site. So this text here, which we had previously replaced with a random slogan chosen from an array, was something that we pull in from Twitter instead. So in order to do that, we'll take a look at our preprocess function for this page and modify the slogan variable. So back in our template.php file, I'll find the code for 960 robots preprocess page, where we had previously been using this array of slogans and just choosing one at random. And what we're going to do is actually replace this code with some code that will query Twitter and pull in a list of all of the most recent posts that match our search query. I'll go ahead and paste in the code for querying Twitter, and then we'll real quickly look at how that works. So this is doing a couple of things. First off, it's creating a new variable named use_Twitter that is the value of that setting. So if the checkbox is checked, this will be 1, and if the checkbox is unchecked, this will be 0. So when someone checks the checkbox, we can say, yep, go ahead and use Twitter, query the Twitter API, and pull in some results and display them in our slogan. If not, go ahead and just use Drupal's slogan that we set in the administration interface. We can then evaluate that. We can say if use Twitter is set to true, and then query Twitter and pull in the search results. There's a little bit of extra work going on here using Drupal's caching system. The cache get and cache set functions here and here are used so that we're not actually querying Twitter for the results of this search on every single page request. This is something that could be pretty slow for a site with a lot of traffic. So what we do is query it once, this line right here, the Drupal HTTP request line, pull in the data. If we get some results, we cache those results, and then we'll use those specified period of time and then expire those from the cache and pull in new ones. That way we don't have to perform this request every single page load. The important part for our theme here is this line, where we're using theme_get_setting to pull in the search term that we added on our theme setting form to this variable named query, using the Drupal encode path function to make sure that it is safe to use in a URL, and then requesting that URL from Twitter. Once that data has been returned, and we've decoded the data returned from Twitter, extracted one of the posts, we can take one of those posts at random, just like before with our random element from within array, and assign it to the site slogan variable, which we've done here. In addition to that, we also use the checkPlain function to make sure that what we're printing out on the page doesn't contain any malicious JavaScript or things that would be insecure. So I'll go ahead and save all of that and switch back over to our site. And if we refresh the page, you can see it's now pulling in a random post from Twitter that contains the search term robot. And if I refresh again, I should get a different one. So it's actually cached a number of different search results from this, so we can see it looks random to the user. If I were to go and change that search term, I would have to empty the cache as well so that new ones would show up, or just wait a couple minutes for the cache to empty itself. So that's an example of how we can use theme settings inside of our theme in order to make it so that this same theme could be used on a number of different websites. We, for example, made it so that an administrator could choose to use whatever character they wanted as the delimiter in this breadcrumb trail, or to search Twitter for any string and use random results from that search and display those as the site slogan.